I want to tell you something that most videos about ancestry and DNA will never say to you. Most people who believe they have Viking ancestry are basing that belief on the wrong things entirely. The eye color videos, the nose shape videos, the check your hands videos. I've made some of those videos. They get views. People love them. But here's the truth I haven't said out loud until now. Those signs alone cannot tell you whether you have Viking blood. Not scientifically, not reliably, not with any real certainty. And if you've been watching content about Viking ancestry for a while and still don't have a clear answer, that's exactly why. Because nobody has sat down and told you the complete picture, the full process, the actual science behind how this works, and what it really takes to find out the truth about your bloodline. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to find out whether you genuinely have Viking ancestry, using the same step-by-step process that people are using right now to get real answers. No guesswork, no misleading trait lists, just the actual science explained clearly with a concrete path you can follow today. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand your own DNA in a way that most people never do. If you have spent any time looking into Viking ancestry online, you have probably seen a pattern. If you have blue eyes, you might be descended from Vikings. If your ring finger curls like this, it could be a Viking trait. If your nose looks like this, you have Norse blood. And here's the thing. I understand why those videos exist, including the ones on this channel, because those physical signs are genuinely interesting. Some of them do appear at higher rates in Scandinavian populations, and they create that personal moment, that feeling of, wait, I have that, which is real and meaningful. But here is what those videos cannot do. They cannot confirm Viking ancestry, because Vikings were not one single physical type. The Norse people were not genetically isolated. They were, by historical definition, the greatest travelers and traders of the medieval world. Over the Viking Age, which lasted from roughly 793 AD to around 1100 AD, Norse people settled on the Scottish Islands, founded Dublin, established the Danelaw across northern England, created the Duchy of Normandy in France, colonized Iceland and Greenland, reached North America, and traded as far east as Baghdad along the Volga River routes. At every one of those locations, Norse people intermarried with local populations. They had children with Celtic Scots and the Irish, with Anglo-Saxons, with Frankish people, with Slavic populations in Eastern Europe, which means two things that fundamentally change how we should think about Viking ancestry. First, Viking DNA exists in populations that look nothing like the stereotypical blonde, blue-eyed Norseman. A person with dark hair and brown eyes from Ireland could be carrying significant Norse ancestry. A person of partial North African descent who traces roots to Norman-settled Sicily could have a measurable Norse haplogroup in their paternal line. Second, and this is the part most videos gets backwards, a person who looks very Viking by the popular checklist might have those traits through other Northern European ancestry that has nothing to do with the Norse people specifically. Blue eyes and a narrow nose appear in many Northern European populations, not just Scandinavian ones. Physical traits give us interesting signals. They do not give us proof. Here is the other thing that makes physical traits unreliable as Viking indicators. Every generation you go back, your DNA from any single ancestor gets diluted by roughly half. Your parents each contribute 50% of your DNA. Your grandparents roughly 25% each. Your great-grandparents around 12.5%. Go back 10 generations, which is only around 300 years, well within the Viking settlement period, and any single ancestor is contributing less than 0.1% of your total DNA. A physical trait inherited from a Norse ancestor 10 generations back might have completely disappeared from your visible appearance. Meanwhile, you might be carrying Scandinavian DNA markers in your genome that no visible physical feature would ever tell you about. And on the other side, a physical trait that looks Viking might have been inherited from a completely different ancestor who had nothing to do with Scandinavia at all. This is why physical signs are the beginning of the curiosity, not the end of the investigation. They are worth noticing, worth exploring, but they are not the answer. The answer is in your DNA. Stay with me, because I'm going to walk you through exactly what that means and exactly what to look for. So if physical traits alone can't confirm it, what can? The honest answer is this. There are really only two ways to get close to a reliable answer about Viking ancestry. 1, your DNA, and 2, your documented family history. And when you combine both of those, when your DNA results line up with what you know about your family's geographic origins, that is when you start to get something genuinely meaningful. Let's go through both. Family history matters more than most people realize when it comes to Viking ancestry. Because the Viking migration routes are well-documented history, we know where Norse people settled. We know which regions of the British Isles, Europe, and the North Atlantic have strong documented Norse settlement history. And we know which surnames, which place names, and which family origins point toward Norse heritage. If your family traces roots to Norway, Sweden, or Denmark, the direct homelands of the Viking people, then Scandinavian DNA ancestry is essentially expected. But the more interesting cases are the indirect lines. Scotland, particularly Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles, was under Norse control and settlement for centuries. Many Scottish surnames and place names are directly Norse in origin. If your family is from those regions, Norse ancestry is historically probable, not just possible. Ireland, particularly Dublin and the east and west coasts, was heavily settled by Norse people from the 9th century onward. The Viking founders of Dublin left measurable genetic traces that are still detectable in Irish DNA studies today. Northern England, particularly Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and East Anglia, was the Danelaw. Viking administered, Viking settled, Viking territory. DNA studies of modern populations from these regions consistently show elevated Norse haplogroup frequencies compared to the rest of Britain. Normandy in France, founded by Norse settlers, named after them, governed by their descendants. If your family has Norman French heritage, there is a documented Norse thread. And critically, for the vast majority of people watching this video who are American, Canadian, Australian, or New Zealanders with British, Irish, or Scandinavian immigrant heritage, that Norse genetic material came with your ancestors when they emigrated. It is sitting in your DNA, whether you know it is there or not. So the first thing to do before you even take a DNA test is to build the clearest possible picture of your family's geographic origins. Where did your grandparents come from? Their parents? Go back as far as you can, because that geographical map is the context that makes your DNA results meaningful. And now, the science. When you take a modern ancestry DNA test, your result does not come back saying Viking or not Viking. It does not work that way. And any service that implies it does is oversimplifying dramatically. What you get back is a detailed genetic ancestry estimate, a breakdown of which global and regional populations your DNA most closely matches, based on comparing your genome against a reference database of hundreds of thousands of people with documented ancestry from specific regions of the world. For identifying Viking and Norse heritage specifically, there are 3 things within those results that matter far more than everything else combined. Your Scandinavian regional percentage, your haplogroup, and your Neanderthal variant count. I'm going to explain all 3 in depth, because understanding what you're looking at is the difference between reading your results and actually understanding your ancestry. And one of these 3 is going to completely change how you think about your own DNA. Stay with me. Your DNA ancestry test works by comparing your genome, your complete genetic code, against what geneticists call reference populations. A reference population is a group of people who have all tested with the same service and who all have strong, documented ancestry from a specific region. in some cases going back multiple generations of people born and raised in that same area. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Scotland, Ireland, and so on. The algorithm then looks at your DNA and asks, which of these reference populations does your genome most closely resemble? Which genetic variants do you share with the Norwegian reference group? How much overlap do you have with the Swedish cluster, the Danish? The percentage figure you see on your results, your Norwegian ancestry or Scandinavian ancestry figure, is an estimate of how much of your genome appears to come from people with ancestry from that region. A few important things to understand about that number. First, it is an estimate with a margin of error, not a precise measurement. Your actual Norse ancestry might be slightly higher or lower than the figure your results show. Different testing companies use different reference populations and different algorithms, which is why you can test with two services and get slightly different percentage figures. Second, a low Scandinavian percentage does not mean no Viking ancestry. Remember what we said earlier about genetic dilution. A great-great-grandparent of predominantly Norwegian origin might contribute only 3 to 5% of your total DNA by the time their genes reach you, but they were still your ancestor. Their Norse haplogroup, the marker we'll get to in a moment, can still be present in your paternal line completely unchanged. Third, a high Scandinavian percentage is genuinely significant. If your results show 15, 20, 25% or more of Scandinavian ancestry, that is not a distant trace. That is a close and substantial Norse ancestral connection. When your results break down your Scandinavian ancestry, the specific regions that connect to Viking heritage are Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, the three countries that were the heartland of the Viking world. Each one tells a slightly different story about your ancestors. Norwegian ancestry connects most directly to the Norse settlers who expanded west, to Scotland, Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, and the North Atlantic. Norwegian Vikings were primarily responsible for the settlement of the Scottish Islands and the founding of Norse colonies in Ireland. If your family has roots in Scotland, Ireland, or the North Atlantic Islands, and your results show Norwegian ancestry, those threads connect directly. Danish ancestry connects most closely to the Viking expansion into England. The great heathen army that invaded England in 865 AD was largely Danish. The Danelaw, the Viking-controlled region that covered the northern and eastern two-thirds of England, was primarily a Danish settlement. Norman ancestry also traces through Danish Viking lines, since the Normans who settled northern France were descendants of the Norse leader Rollo, who was likely Norwegian or Danish. Swedish ancestry, in the context of Viking heritage, points toward the eastern expansion, the Varangian routes through Russia and Eastern Europe, trade networks into Byzantium and the Islamic world, and the Norse populations of the Baltic region. Any combination of these three, appearing in your results, is a direct signal pointing toward Norse ancestry. And now, the part of your DNA results that most people completely overlook. And it is arguably the most powerful indicator of ancestry available to us: your haplogroup. Here is what a haplogroup is. Certain sections of your DNA are passed from parent to child almost completely unchanged across thousands of generations. Your Y-DNA, the section of genetic code passed exclusively from father to son, carries what we call a Y-DNA haplogroup. Your mitochondrial DNA, passed from mother to child, carries an mtDNA haplogroup. Unlike your ancestry percentage estimates, which get diluted with every generation, your haplogroup does not dilute. Your Y-DNA haplogroup is the same haplogroup that your father carries, and his father before him, going back hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of years through your direct paternal line. This means that even if Norse ancestry only appears as a small percentage in your overall estimate, if your Y-DNA haplogroup is a Norse haplogroup, your direct paternal lineage traces back to the Norse people with no dilution whatsoever. So which haplogroups are specifically associated with Viking and Norse ancestry? There are three that matter most. The first is I1, also written as I-M253. This is arguably the most specifically Scandinavian haplogroup that exists. It originated in what is now Scandinavia and achieved its highest frequencies there. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark all show I1 frequencies significantly above the European average. If your Y-DNA haplogroup is I1, the connection to Scandinavian Norse ancestry is extremely strong. This is as close to a direct genetic line to the Vikings as the science currently allows us to identify. The second is R1b-U106, sometimes written as R1b-S21. This haplogroup spread through Northern Europe and is found at its highest concentrations in Scandinavia, the Netherlands, Northern Germany, and the Viking-settled regions of the British Isles. It is one of the most common haplogroups in Norse-descended populations. The third is R1a-Z284, a specific variant of R1a that is particularly associated with Western Scandinavian, especially Norwegian, ancestry. This is distinct from the Eastern European variant of R1a, which connects to Slavic rather than Norse populations. If you test and find any of these haplogroups in your Y-DNA results, especially I1, you are carrying a direct, undiluted genetic connection to the people who built the longships. And now the thing that genuinely surprised me when I first understood it properly. Modern humans, our direct ancestors, first migrated out of Africa between 60 and 100,000 years ago. When they arrived in Europe and Western Asia, they found Neanderthals already there. Neanderthals had lived across Europe for hundreds of thousands of years before we arrived. And something remarkable happened when these two groups met. They had children. Modern humans and Neanderthals interbred, and the Neanderthal genetic variants that entered the modern human genome at that moment have been passed down through every generation since, in different amounts, depending on which populations your ancestors came from. People of entirely African descent carry almost no Neanderthal DNA because their ancestors never made the migration through Neanderthal-inhabited Europe. They represent the baseline, but people of European ancestry, and especially Northern European and Scandinavian ancestry, carry some of the highest Neanderthal variant counts in the world, because their ancestors moved through the regions of Europe where Neanderthal populations were most concentrated. Modern ancestry DNA tests measure your Neanderthal variant count and show you how that number compares to everyone else who has tested with that service. For people with strong Scandinavian ancestry, these figures are consistently among the highest in the database. A 2023 study from the Karolinska Institutet in Sweden, one of the most prestigious medical research institutions in the world, found that 3 of the most powerful genetic variants associated with Dupuytren's contracture, the hereditary hand condition sometimes called the Viking disease, were Neanderthal in origin, inherited through Northern European and Scandinavian populations from that same ancient interbreeding event. So that physical sign we talked about earlier, the hand that never quite lays flat, is not just a Viking age trait. It is 40,000 years old, older than the Viking civilization by 39,000 years. Your Neanderthal variant count in your DNA results is not a curiosity. It is a direct measurement of how deep your Northern European ancestry actually goes. And for people with genuine Norse heritage, it tells a story that goes far beyond the medieval age of the longships. There's one more thing I need to explain before we get to the process, and it's the piece that changes how you read everything else in your results. Everything we have covered so far is the foundation. Now let's talk about how to actually read your results and what to look for. If you have already taken a DNA test and you are looking at your results right now, this section is going to change how you understand what you are seeing. If you haven't tested yet, this section is going to show you exactly what your results will tell you and why they are worth getting. Step 1. Your Scandinavian percentage. Open your ethnicity estimate and look specifically for any combination of the following regional labels: Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, Scandinavian, or Nordic. Different testing companies use slightly different labels. Some will break it down by specific country. Others will group it as a broader Scandinavian or Northern European category. Both are valid. The underlying data is the same. Here is how to interpret what you find. Any Scandinavian percentage above 15% represents a substantial Norse ancestral contribution. This is not a distant trace. This reflects ancestors who were predominantly or significantly Scandinavian within a few generations. A percentage between 5 and 15% suggests Norse ancestry that is real but slightly further back in your family tree. Great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, or Norse ancestry mixed with other Northern European heritage. This is still meaningful and worth exploring. A percentage below 5% is where it gets more nuanced. It could represent very distant Norse ancestry. It could be a statistical artifact of the algorithm. It could also reflect Norse ancestry that is present in your haplogroup but has been diluted almost entirely out of your percentage estimate through subsequent generations of mixed ancestry. This is why you cannot rely on the percentage figure alone. The percentage is your starting point, not your conclusion. Step 2. Your haplogroup. Navigate to the haplogroup section of your results. Not all testing services display this prominently. In some cases, you may need to look for it specifically in a separate section or download a more detailed results file. What you are looking for is your Y DNA haplogroup if you are male, or your mitochondrial DNA haplogroup, which applies to everyone. Cross-reference your Y DNA haplogroup against the 3 Norse haplogroups I identified earlier: I1, R1b-U106, and R1a-Z284. If your haplogroup matches I1, your direct paternal line traces back to Scandinavian Norse ancestry with a very high degree of confidence. This is the most specific Norse haplogroup and the most powerful single genetic indicator of Viking heritage that a DNA test can show you. If your haplogroup is R1b-U106, your paternal line traces through the broader Northern European Norse-associated populations, the Germanic and Norse peoples of Scandinavia, the Netherlands, and Northern Germany. If your haplogroup is R1a-Z284 specifically, and it is important to get the specific subtype rather than just R1a broadly, your paternal line traces to Western Scandinavian, particularly Norwegian ancestry. A haplogroup match here, combined with any Scandinavian percentage in your estimate, is the closest thing modern genetics can give you to confirmation of Norse ancestry. Step 3. Your Neanderthal variant count. Find the Neanderthal section of your results. This is often listed separately from your ethnicity estimate, sometimes under a section called Traits or Additional Features. Your report will show you a specific number of Neanderthal variants you carry, and crucially, how that number compares to the rest of the tested population. You will typically see something like, you have more Neanderthal variants than X% of users. For people with strong Northern European and Scandinavian ancestry, this figure is consistently in the upper ranges, often in the top 10 to 20% of all tested individuals. If you have a high Scandinavian percentage estimate, a Norse haplogroup, and a high Neanderthal variant count, those 3 things together paint a picture that is remarkably consistent across people with genuine Norse heritage. It is not definitive, no single data point is, but the convergence of all 3 is about as strong a genetic signal as currently exists for Viking ancestry. Step 4. Your migration maps. Many modern DNA tests now overlay your ancestry results on historical migration maps, showing the approximate routes your direct ancestral lines have taken across Europe and into the modern world. For people with Norse heritage, these maps will typically show a migration line originating in Scandinavia, moving through the Viking expansion routes. west to the British Isles, south to Normandy, or northwest to Iceland, and then, in more recent centuries, crossing the Atlantic to wherever your family eventually settled. These maps are not perfectly precise. They are estimates based on population genetics data, but they are often startlingly accurate, and for people who have spent years wondering about their family's origins, seeing that migration path visualized can be genuinely moving. Step 5. Combining DNA with family history. Here is the step most people skip, and it is the one that takes a good answer and makes it a great one. Once you have your DNA results, compare everything you find against what you know about your family's geographic origins. If your results show 15% Norwegian ancestry and your grandmother's family came from Scotland, that combination tells a story. Scottish families with Norwegian DNA are frequently descended from Norse settlers who established communities in the Scottish Islands and western coast from the 9th century onward. The two pieces of evidence together are far more meaningful than either one alone. If your results show a Danish ancestry component and your family has roots in Yorkshire or Lincolnshire in northern England, that is the Danelaw connection playing out in your own personal data. If your family came to the United States or Canada from Ireland, and your results show an unexpected Norse component, you may be looking at the genetic legacy of the Norse settlement of Dublin and the Irish coastline, lines of descent that Irish immigrant families brought with them across the Atlantic. Build both pictures simultaneously. The DNA is the science. The family history is the story. Together, they give you something neither can give you alone. Now I want to show you how to actually start this process and which tools give you the most reliable answers for finding Viking ancestry specifically. Before we get to the practical steps, I want to give you the historical context that makes everything we have discussed personally relevant, regardless of where you live right now. Because one of the most common things I see in comments on this channel is people saying, "My family is Irish," or "My family is from Yorkshire," or "My grandparents came from Scotland. Can I really have Viking ancestry?" The answer, in almost every one of those cases, is not just yes. It is a most definite yes. And here is specifically how. Scotland, the Norse colony that stayed. The Norse settlement of Scotland was not a raid, it was a colonization. From the late 8th century onward, Norse settlers established permanent communities across Orkney, Shetland, the Outer Hebrides, and the western coast of mainland Scotland. Orkney and Shetland remained under Norwegian sovereignty until 1468, 6 centuries of Norse political and cultural control. The place names of these regions are still largely Norse today. Ness, from the Old Norse word for headland. Wick, from Vik, meaning bay or inlet, the same root word that gives us Viking. Bister and Bolster, from Norse farming terms. The landscape of northern Scotland is still speaking Norse if you know what to listen for. Norse settlers intermarried extensively with Pictish and Gaelic populations over generations. Their descendants, carrying both Norse haplogroups and measurable Scandinavian DNA, became part of the Scottish genetic landscape. And when Scottish families emigrated to North America, Australia, and the rest of the world in the 18th and 19th centuries, that Norse genetic material traveled with them. Ireland, the Viking cities. The popular image of Vikings in Ireland is all raid and no settlement. The history is far more interesting. From the 9th century onward, Norse settlers established permanent fortified trading posts along the Irish coastline. Those settlements became cities. Dublin, now the capital of Ireland, was founded by Norse settlers. Its original name was Dublin, a translation of the Norse Dyflin. Waterford, Wexford, Limerick, and Cork all have Norse foundations. Genetic studies of Irish populations, particularly those from the east and southeast coast, have found elevated frequencies of Norse haplogroups compared to the Irish average, directly traceable to these Norse settlement communities. The Norse who founded Dublin did not leave after a generation. They stayed, intermarried with Irish Gaelic populations, became part of Irish society and passed their DNA forward. Those lines of descent are now embedded in Irish families whose surnames are entirely Gaelic and who may have no conscious awareness of any Norse connection whatsoever. Northern England, the Danelaw. In 865 AD, a massive Norse force, referred to in Anglo-Saxon chronicles as the Great Heathen Army, landed in East Anglia and began a campaign of conquest that would reshape England. Within 15 years, the Norse controlled the northern and eastern two-thirds of England. The region became the Danelaw, governed under Viking law, administered by Viking leaders, and increasingly settled by Norse families who farmed the land and raised children alongside Anglo-Saxon populations. York, which the Vikings called Jorvik, became one of the largest and most sophisticated Norse cities outside Scandinavia. Archaeological excavations at Jorvik have revealed a city with extensive Norse cultural material, tools, jewelry, combs, everyday objects, showing a Norse population that was not just militarily occupying the city, but living in it fully. Modern genetic studies of populations from Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, East Anglia, and the East Midlands consistently show Norse haplogroup frequencies that are measurably higher than the English average. The Danelaw is not just history. It is still present in the DNA of the people who live in those regions today. North America, Canada, and Australia, the modern dispersal. And here is the direct connection for the majority of the people watching this video. The great waves of emigration from Scotland, Ireland, and Northern England to North America, Canada, and Australia came in the 18th and 19th centuries, 1,000 years after the Viking Age. But the Norse genetic material embedded in those populations over the Viking Age came with the emigrants. Your great-great-grandmother, who emigrated from County Mayo to Boston in the 1840s, may have been carrying a Y-DNA haplogroup in her male line ancestry that traces directly back to a Norse settler who arrived on the west coast of Ireland in the 9th century. Your grandfather, who came from Yorkshire to Ontario, may have been carrying a Norse haplogroup that his Danelaw ancestors have been passing down since the 9th century, through 1,000 years of English-speaking family history that gave no indication of its Norse origin. This is not speculation. This is what population genetics studies of these communities consistently find. The Norse thread is there. Modern DNA science is what makes it visible. And that brings us to the practical question. How do you actually see it in your own results? Let me show you exactly what to do. All right, let's bring everything together into the actual process. If you are serious about finding out whether you have Viking ancestry properly, with real evidence, here is exactly what to do in order. Step 1. Build your family history map. Before you do anything with DNA, go as far back as you can with documented family history. Where were your grandparents born? Their parents? Write it down. Note every country, every region, every surname you can find. This context is what makes your DNA results meaningful. A Norwegian ancestry percentage means something very different if your family has roots in Orkney versus if you have no known connection to the British Isles at all. Step 2. Take a reliable DNA ancestry test. Not all tests are equal for identifying Viking ancestry specifically. What you need is a test with a large enough database to give you precise regional Scandinavian breakdowns, not just a broad European category. You need one that shows your haplogroup, and you need one that measures your Neanderthal variant count. I'll tell you exactly which ones meet all three of those criteria in just a moment. Step 3. When your results arrive, look for the 5 things we discussed. Your Scandinavian percentage, specifically Norwegian, Swedish, or Danish regional breakdowns. Your haplogroup. Is it I1, R1b-U106, or R1a-Z284? Your Neanderthal variant count, and how it compares to the overall tested population. Your migration maps. What story do they tell about where your direct ancestral lines came from? and any other Northern European ancestry components, British, Irish, German, Dutch, that may be carrying diluted Norse heritage within them. Step 4. Cross-reference your results with your family history map. Do the DNA findings align with what you know about your family's geographic origins? Where the two converge, where the DNA evidence and the documented family history point to the same regions, that is where you start to get genuine confidence in what you are finding. Step 5. Go deeper if the results open new questions. Many testing services allow you to connect with DNA matches, other people who share significant sections of your genome, indicating a common ancestor. If you find matches with people who have documented Scandinavian ancestry, that adds another layer of evidence. Some services also allow you to upload your raw DNA data to third-party databases for additional analysis, which can give you more detailed haplogroup information than the primary test alone. This is the complete process, start to finish. No shortcuts, no guesswork. And it starts with the next step, choosing the right test. Now, the part of this video I have been building toward. If you want to actually do this, if you want to follow the process I have just walked you through and get real answers about your Viking ancestry, choosing the right DNA test matters. Because not all tests give you the same level of detail. Not all of them show your haplogroup. Not all of them break down Scandinavian ancestry into specific regional subgroups, and not all of them measure your Neanderthal variant count. After going through the options carefully, there are two that I genuinely recommend for this specific purpose: finding Viking and Norse ancestry, and they are good for different reasons. The first recommendation. The first is the test kit I recommend for the majority of people watching this video. It is called Ancestry DNA. It has the largest database of any consumer DNA testing service, over 20 million people tested. That size matters directly for accuracy. The larger the reference database, the more precisely it can break down your regional ancestry. For Scandinavian ancestry specifically, a larger database means more precise distinctions between Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish regional clusters, rather than just a broad Scandinavian estimate. It gives you migration maps showing exactly where your direct ancestral lines traveled across Europe and into the modern world. And it is the service most likely to find you DNA matches with people who have documented Scandinavian family history, which adds that additional layer of confirmation we talked about in Step 5. If you have never tested before, or if you tested years ago and want more current and precise results, this is where I would start. The link is in the description below, and using my link supports this channel at absolutely no extra cost to you. The second test kit is called 23andMe. This kit is for people who want to go significantly deeper into their ancestry. The things we covered earlier in this video, your haplogroup and your Neanderthal variant count. 23andMe is the only major consumer DNA test that delivers both of these clearly. It will show you your Y-DNA haplogroup, giving you a direct answer on whether your paternal line carries I1, R1b-U106, or R1a-Z284, the three Norse haplogroups we discussed. And it will show you your Neanderthal variant count with a direct comparison to the rest of their tested population, so you can see exactly where your Northern European ancestry places you against everyone else who has tested. It is also the service I would recommend if you already have results from Ancestry DNA and you want to go further, particularly if your Scandinavian percentage was significant and you now want to understand exactly which haplogroup your paternal line carries and what that tells you about your specific Norse ancestry. Both links are in the description. If you are just starting out, use Ancestry DNA first. If you want your haplogroup and your Neanderthal count, 23andMe is where to go. If you've been wondering about your ancestry for a while, and I suspect you have been, given that you have watched this far, this is genuinely the best place to start. The answers are there. They have always been there, sitting in your DNA. Modern science just gave us the tools to read them. I want to close by saying something that I think is actually important. This curiosity you have about your ancestry, this pull towards something older, something that feels like it belongs to you, it is worth taking seriously. Not because of the mythology, not because of the popular image of Vikings as warriors and raiders, which is a fraction of who they actually were, but because identity matters. Knowing where you come from matters. Having a real, evidence-based connection to your heritage rather than a vague feeling or a list of physical traits, that matters. The Vikings built the first European settlements in North America, 5 centuries before Columbus. They navigated the North Atlantic from memory. They founded cities. They were merchants, poets, farmers, explorers, craftsmen. They built legal systems. They created one of the richest oral literary traditions in medieval Europe. And they left something of themselves in the populations they encountered everywhere they went. If that legacy is part of your story, if the science confirms what you have always suspected, that is not a trivial discovery. That is 40,000 years of human survival passing through your specific bloodline and arriving straight to you. The physical signs we talk about on this channel are real and interesting, but they are not the answer. The answer is in your DNA, and now you know exactly how to find it. If this video gave you something, drop a comment right now. Tell me, have you tested? What does your Scandinavian percentage say? What haplogroup are you? I read every comment on this channel, and I reply to as many as I can. Subscribe if you want to go further. Every video on this channel goes deeper. Physical signs, specific haplogroups, historical migration events, genetic conditions that trace back to the Norse people. All of it connecting the science to your personal ancestry. Both recommended DNA kits are linked in the description. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.